What happens when a pregnant woman discovers her CEO husband's betrayal through a viral TikTok with 2 million views? Sarah thought she knew Jake Morrison until she found him partying with a supermodel while she sat home with his baby. But when Jake divorces her at their own baby shower and steals her life's work, he makes one fatal mistake. He assumes Sarah Mason is powerless. What Jake doesn't know is that Sarah has been hiding the biggest secret of all, one that will turn his billion-dollar empire to dust. This is the true story of how a woman lost everything, then discovered she had the power to take it all back. If you love stories of justice and incredible comebacks, hit that like button and subscribe, because this revenge is about to get legendary. Let's dive in. Sarah Reynolds stood in her kitchen at 7 months pregnant, stirring oatmeal with one hand while scrolling through TikTok with the other. The algorithm had been kind to her lately, serving up pregnancy tips and nursery ideas. But then she saw it. The video that would destroy her world. Her husband, Jake Morrison, CEO of the tech startup they had built together, was at Coachella, not alone. A stunning blonde in a barely there festival outfit was grinding against him while he poured champagne into her mouth. The caption read, "When your CEO boyfriend knows how to party, while wifey stays home with the baby bump." 2.3 million views. 47,000 comments. Sarah's hands trembled as she read them. Poor pregnant wife at home while he's living his best life. She looks so basic compared to this goddess. Smart man trading up before the kid traps him. The blonde was Madison Wells, an Instagram influencer Jake had hired for their marketing campaigns. Sarah remembered suggesting her, praising her creativity and engagement rates. How naive she had been. Jake walked through the front door 20 minutes later, designer luggage in hand, acting as if nothing had happened. His hair was still messy from the festival, and Sarah could smell expensive perfume that wasn't hers. "How was your business trip?" Sarah asked, her voice barely steady. "Productive," Jake replied without looking at her. He grabbed a protein shake from the fridge, made some good connections. "You know how these conferences are." "Conferences," Sarah held up her phone. "This is what conferences look like now." Jake's face went pale as he saw the TikTok video. For a moment, Sarah thought she saw genuine remorse. Then his expression hardened. "Sarah, we need to talk." Those 5 words every married woman dreads. Sarah felt their baby kick, as if sensing the tension. "I've been thinking," Jake continued, settling into their dining chair like he was about to deliver a business presentation. "This marriage isn't working anymore. We're different people than when we started." "Different people?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Jake, I'm 7 months pregnant with your child." "That's the problem." He ran his hands through his dark hair, a gesture she once found endearing. "I'm 28 years old. My company is about to go public. I need a partner who can grow with me. Not someone who's going to be stuck at home with a baby." The words hit her like physical blows. Sarah gripped the counter, her wedding ring catching the morning light streaming through their San Francisco loft windows. "Someone like Madison understands my world. She's sophisticated, photogenic, ambitious. The board loves her. Investors respond to her." Jake's voice took on the confident tone he used in pitch meetings. "Image matters in this business. Sarah, you know that." "I helped you build this company," Sarah whispered. "The original app idea was mine. I coded the first prototype while you were still trying to find investors." "And I'm grateful for that," Jake said, already moving toward their bedroom. "My lawyer will make sure you're taken care of. The prenup protects both of us." Sarah followed him, watching as he began throwing clothes into a suitcase. Designer shirts she had bought him for Christmas, the watch she saved for months to afford, the life they had built together, reduced to items in luggage. Jake, please, we can work through this. Marriages have rough patches. The pregnancy hormones make everything more intense. But after the baby comes, there is no after. Jake zipped his suitcase with finality. I'm moving in with Madison. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings. He paused at the door, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the successful CEO the business magazines loved to profile. For a moment, Sarah thought he might say something kind, something that acknowledged the 3 years they had spent together, the dreams they had shared. Instead, he said, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sarah, you're a smart woman. You'll figure it out." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Sarah sank onto their couch, her hands cradling her belly. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the San Francisco Bay sparkling in the distance. This view had once represented possibility, the future they were building together. Now it felt like a prison. Her phone buzzed with notifications, more comments on the viral video, more strangers dissecting her marriage, her appearance, her worth. The digital mob had already decided Jake Morrison was a success story, and she was just another woman who couldn't keep her man happy. Little did they know, Sarah Reynolds had secrets of her own, secrets that would change everything. But first, she had to survive what was coming. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in Maya Chen's beautifully decorated backyard, surrounded by 30 of her closest friends and family members. Pink and gold balloons danced in the afternoon breeze, and a 3-tiered cake shaped like a baby booty sat on the dessert table. Maya had insisted on throwing the baby shower, despite Sarah's protests that she wasn't in the mood for celebrating. "You need this," her best friend and business partner had said. "You need to remember that you have people who love you, baby or no baby daddy." Sarah had reluctantly agreed, hoping the distraction might ease the constant ache in her chest. For 2 hours, she had managed to smile and laugh, opening gifts and playing silly games. She almost felt normal again. Then Jake walked through the garden gate. The conversation died instantly. 30 faces turned toward him, expressions ranging from shock to outright hostility. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and carried a manila envelope. "Jake," Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I tried calling," he said, his tone businesslike. This couldn't wait. Maya stepped forward, her small frame vibrating with anger. "Are you seriously doing this here?" "At her baby shower." "It's better to handle these things cleanly," Jake replied, extending the envelope toward Sarah. "No drama, no drawn-out process." Sarah's hand shook as she took the papers. The legal language blurred before her eyes, but she caught the important words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Irreconcilable differences, division of assets. You couldn't wait until after the baby was born. This came from Sarah's sister, Emma, who had flown in from Boston for the shower. Jake's jaw tightened. "Actually, there's something else everyone should know." He pulled out his phone and showed them a photo of him and Madison at what looked like a fancy restaurant. Madison's left hand prominently displayed a massive diamond ring. "Madison and I got engaged yesterday." The gasps from the party guests were audible. Someone's champagne flute shattered on the patio stones. "You proposed to your mistress while your wife is pregnant." Emma's voice rose to a near shout. "Sarah and I have been having problems for months," Jake said, his media-trained voice smooth and confident. "The pregnancy was an accident. We both knew this marriage was over." "That's not true," Sarah managed, her voice barely audible. "Isn't it?" Jake's eyes met hers, and she saw something cold there, something she had never noticed before. "When was the last time you came to a company event with me?" When was the last time you even got dressed up? You've been checked out of this relationship since the first trimester. The cruelty of his words, delivered in front of everyone she cared about, hit Sarah like a physical blow. Several guests were now filming with their phones. She realized this moment would be online within hours, dissected by strangers who would decide whether she deserved sympathy or blame. I was tired, she said weakly. Pregnancy is exhausting. You said you understood. I understood for a while, Jake replied. But Madison showed me what it's like to be with someone who actually wants to be part of my life, not just along for the ride. Sarah felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen, then another. The stress was affecting the baby. Jake, stop, Maya said, moving to Sarah's side. Can't you see you're hurting her? I'm not the villain here, Jake said, his voice rising. I'm being honest about a marriage that wasn't working. Sarah knew this day would come. You're right, Sarah said suddenly, surprising everyone, including herself. I should have seen this coming. She should have noticed the late-night phone calls, the weekend team-building exercises she wasn't invited to, the way he had stopped asking about her day or touching her belly when the baby kicked. The pain in her abdomen intensified. Sarah doubled over, clutching her stomach. Sarah. Emma rushed to her side. Something's wrong. Sarah gasped. She felt wetness between her legs and looked down to see fluid staining her dress. The baby chaos erupted. Emma called 911 while Maya grabbed towels. The party guests scattered, some trying to help, others backing away as if pregnancy complications were contagious. Jake stood frozen, the divorce papers still in his hands. Aren't you going to do something? Maya screamed at him. This is your child, too. Jake looked at Sarah, writhing in pain on a lawn chair while they waited for the ambulance. For just a moment, his composed facade cracked, and she saw fear in his eyes. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID Madison. He answered it. Hey, babe. His voice shifted back to warm and loving, a tone Sarah hadn't heard directed at her in months. Yeah, I'm handling the paperwork now. Should be done soon. Sarah watched her husband of 3 years walk to the far side of the garden to take his fiancé's call while paramedics loaded her into an ambulance. The baby, thankfully, was fine. False labor brought on by extreme stress. But as Sarah lay in the hospital bed that evening, scrolling through social media posts from her own baby shower, she realized something important. She was done being Jake Morrison's victim. It was time to remember who Sarah Reynolds really was. Sarah's phone rang at 6 a.m., jolting her from restless sleep. 3 days had passed since the baby shower incident, and she was still recovering both physically and emotionally. Mrs. Morrison. The voice was crisp, professional. This is Jennifer Walsh from First National Bank. I'm calling about your checking account. Sarah sat up in bed, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. What about it? Your account has been frozen pending resolution of a legal dispute. I'm showing a hold placed by Morrison Holdings, LLC. The words didn't make sense at first. Morrison Holdings was Jake's investment company, but their personal accounts were separate. At least, she had thought they were. There must be a mistake, Sarah said. That's my personal account. I've had it for years. I'm sorry, but according to our records, Morrison Holdings is listed as a co-signer with authority to freeze assets during legal proceedings. You'll need to speak with your attorney. Sarah hung up and immediately called their bank's customer service line. After 40 minutes on hold, she learned the devastating truth Jake had quietly added Morrison Holdings as a co-signer to all their accounts over the past year, claiming it was for business optimization and tax benefits. She had signed the paperwork without reading it carefully, trusting her husband completely. Now she had $847 in her personal savings account and no access to the money she had earned from her freelance coding work. Sarah called her lawyer, David Kim, whom she had hastily retained after receiving the divorce papers. "Sarah, I have bad news," David said without preamble. "I've reviewed your prenup more carefully. The intellectual property clause is broader than I initially thought." "What does that mean?" "It means any work you did while married to Jake, including the original app concept and code, legally belongs to the marital partnership. But since Jake filed first and claimed the business assets, you'll have to prove your contributions in court. That could take months." Sarah's chest tightened. "But I have emails, code repositories, everything time-stamped to prove I created the original concept. Jake's legal team is claiming you were working as his employee, not his partner. They're saying the app was his idea and you were simply implementing his vision under his direction." "That's insane. I have witnesses. Maya was there when I first pitched the concept. My sister heard me talking about it at Christmas 2 years ago." "Hearsay won't be enough," David said gently. "Do you have any written documentation where Jake acknowledges the idea was yours? Contracts, partnership agreements, anything official?" Sarah's mind raced through years of casual conversations, text messages, and informal collaborations. Jake had always been the public face of their company, while she stayed in the background, coding and problem-solving. She had been happy to let him take the spotlight, never imagining she would need proof of her own contributions. "No," she whispered. "We were married. I trusted him." That afternoon, Maya came over with Chinese takeout and a grim expression. "I have more bad news," Maya said, settling onto Sarah's couch. "I got a call from Rebecca Martinez at TechFlow Ventures. They're pulling out of our new project." Sarah dropped her chopsticks. Maya's consulting firm had been her financial lifeline, the one source of income she thought Jake couldn't touch. Why, apparently, Jake's lawyers sent them a cease and desist letter claiming our app violates intellectual property owned by Morrison Holdings. They're saying any work we do together is based on stolen code. Sarah stared at her friend, trying to process the implications. "He's destroying my ability to work. It gets worse," Maya continued reluctantly. 3 other potential clients called today asking if the lawsuit rumors were true. "Word is spreading that you're radioactive in Silicon Valley." Sarah felt the baby kick, a reminder of the new life depending on her. Medical bills were already piling up from her recent hospital visits. Her Cobra health insurance through Jake's company would end soon. And now her ability to earn money was being systematically destroyed. "There has to be something we can do," Sarah said. Maya hesitated. "There might be. I've been thinking about what you told me years ago, about your family in Boston." Sarah's blood ran cold. "No, absolutely not. Sarah, you're about to be a single mother with no income and a vindictive ex-husband who's using the legal system to destroy you. Maybe it's time to stop running from who you really are." 6 years ago, Sarah had fled Boston after a massive fight with her father, Frank Reynolds, over his expectations for her life. The Reynolds family had built their fortune in investment banking and real estate. But Frank had wanted Sarah to join the family business instead of pursuing her tech dreams. She had left with nothing but her college fund, determined to prove she could succeed on her own terms. She had even changed her name from Sarah Reynolds to Sarah Mason to avoid any connection to her family's wealth. "My father and I haven't spoken in years," Sarah said. "He probably doesn't even know I'm married." "Maybe it's time to change that," Maya said gently. "Because right now, Jake is counting on you being powerless. He's betting that you don't have the resources to fight back." Sarah looked around her small apartment, at the baby clothes she could barely afford, at the stack of medical bills on her coffee table. Outside, San Francisco glittered with the promise of tech fortunes and startup dreams. Jake had systematically cut off every avenue of financial independence, using the legal system and her own trust against her. He thought he had trapped her completely. What he didn't know was that Sarah Reynolds came from a family that had been playing financial chess for 3 generations. It was time to stop playing defense. That night, Sarah stared at her father's contact information for 2 hours before finally typing a simple message. "Dad, it's Sarah. I need to talk." The response came back within 5 minutes. "I'll have my plane ready. Come home." Sarah's phone buzzed at 3 a.m. with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the news about the divorce. Don't worry. Jake's taking good care of me now. Hope the baby drama gets better soon. XOXO, Madison." Attached was a photo of Madison and Jake on a private jet. Champagne glasses raised in a toast. Sarah was still staring at the message when the contractions started. Sharp, breath-stealing pain that radiated from her lower back through her entire abdomen. At 32 weeks pregnant, this was far too early. "Maya," Sarah gasped into her phone. "Something's wrong." The ride to San Francisco General Hospital passed in a blur of pain and panic. Maya held Sarah's hand in the back of the Uber while Sarah tried to breathe through contractions that were coming every 3 minutes. "It's too early." Sarah kept repeating, "The baby isn't ready." In the emergency room, monitors beeped urgently as Sarah's blood pressure spiked. The contractions were relentless now, and she could see fear in the nurses' faces as they worked to slow her labor. "We need to stop this," Dr. Patricia Reeves explained, adjusting medication drips. "Your baby needs more time to develop. The next few hours are critical." Through her pain, Sarah managed to call Jake. He needed to know his child was in danger. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. Maya took the phone and tried calling Jake's office, his assistant, even Madison's public Instagram account. No response. "Where is he?" Sarah sobbed between contractions. "According to Instagram," Maya said grimly, "somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, flying to Tokyo for Madison's modeling shoot." Dr. Reeves returned with paperwork and a concerned expression. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about your insurance coverage." "What about it?" "It's been terminated. According to our system, your policy through Morrison Holdings was canceled yesterday." Sarah's world tilted sideways. "That's impossible. Jake wouldn't..." But even as she said it, she knew he would. "We can still provide emergency care," Dr. Reeves continued, "but if we need to deliver the baby early, the NICU costs could be significant. Premature babies often require weeks or months of intensive care." "How significant?" "Potentially tens of thousands of dollars per week." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to process this new crisis while her body fought to deliver a baby that wasn't ready to be born. Jake had not only left her financially stranded, but had actively sabotaged her ability to care for their child. The contractions continued for 18 hours before finally slowing enough for Dr. Reeves to declare the crisis temporarily stabilized. Sarah would need to remain on bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. Bed rest means no work, no stress, no activity beyond absolutely essential, Dr. Reeves explained. Any additional strain could trigger premature labor, which meant no income, no ability to fight Jake's legal maneuvers, and complete dependence on others for survival. Maya helped Sarah back to her apartment, where a stack of medical bills already waited on the kitchen counter. The emergency room visit alone would cost $12,000. "I have some savings," Maya offered quietly. "I can't ask you to..." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Maya's voice was firm. "But Sarah, this can't go on. You need real help." That evening, alone in her apartment, Sarah finally opened her laptop and began typing an email to her father. She explained everything: the marriage, the pregnancy, Jake's betrayal, the financial trap she was caught in. She hesitated before hitting send, knowing that reaching out to Frank Reynolds would change everything. Once her family learned about her situation, there would be no going back to her carefully constructed independent life. But as she looked at the ultrasound photo on her coffee table, her daughter's tiny profile visible in grainy black and white, Sarah realized her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She sent the email. Frank Reynolds called her within 20 minutes. Sarah Elizabeth Reynolds. His familiar Boston accent carried a mixture of relief and fury. Do you have any idea how worried I've been 6 years without a word? And now I find out you're married, pregnant, and being destroyed by some startup punk who doesn't know who he's messing with. Despite everything, Sarah smiled at the sound of her father's voice. Hi, Dad. Pack a bag. My plane lands at SFO in 4 hours. Dad, I can't travel. Doctor's orders. Then I'm coming to you. We'll handle this situation properly. It's complicated. Sarah, Frank's voice softened. You're my daughter. Your child is my grandchild. Nothing else matters. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Jake Morrison had made a critical error in his campaign to destroy her. He had assumed Sarah Mason, struggling startup founder, was powerless against his wealth and connections. He had no idea he was actually dealing with Sarah Reynolds, daughter of one of Boston's most powerful financial dynasties. The real battle was about to begin. Frank Reynolds arrived at Sarah's San Francisco apartment like a small hurricane in a $5,000 suit. At 58, he still commanded attention the way successful men do, with perfect posture, piercing blue eyes, and an aura of absolute confidence. Sarah barely had time to change out of her maternity pajamas before he was knocking on her door, flanked by 2 assistants carrying briefcases and a stack of legal documents. Let me look at you, Frank said, pulling his daughter into a careful hug that accommodated her pregnant belly. Too thin. We'll fix that. Within 2 hours, Sarah's apartment had been transformed into a war room. Frank's team had set up laptops on her dining table, and her coffee table was covered with financial statements, legal briefs, and investigation reports. This Jake Morrison character made one crucial mistake, Frank said, reviewing documents while Sarah sipped the gourmet hot chocolate his assistant had somehow procured. He underestimated his opponent. Sarah watched her father work, remembering why he had built Reynolds Capital into one of Boston's most feared investment firms. Frank approached problems like military campaigns, thorough research, strategic planning, overwhelming force. The prenup has some weaknesses, announced Patricia Hoffman, the attorney Frank had flown in from Boston, particularly around intellectual property created before the marriage was finalized. What do you mean? Sarah asked. Your original app concept. If we can prove you developed it before legally marrying Jake, it might not be covered under the marital property clauses. Sarah's heart jumped. I have emails and code repositories going back 18 months before our wedding. That's exactly what we need. Patricia smiled. Frank, this case just became much more winnable. Over the next week, Sarah watched her father systematically dismantle Jake's legal strategy. Frank hired forensic accountants to trace every financial transaction, private investigators to document Jake's relationship timeline with Madison, and IP lawyers to establish Sarah's ownership of the original technology. Your husband made another error, Frank announced on Thursday evening. He's been using marital assets to fund his new lifestyle with the model. Under California law, that's considered financial misconduct. Sarah felt genuinely hopeful for the first time since Jake had served her with divorce papers. Her father's resources were making quick work of problems that had seemed insurmountable. How long before we can file our countersuit? Sarah asked. Monday, Patricia replied confidently. We'll hit him with intellectual property theft, financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraudulent transfer of assets. Frank leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression Sarah remembered from her childhood when he had closed particularly lucrative deals. By the time we're finished with Mr. Morrison, he'll be lucky to keep his company name. Sarah allowed herself to imagine victory, reclaiming her rightful ownership of the app she had created, financial security for her daughter, Jake facing consequences for his betrayal. That weekend, she even started planning. She would move back to Boston after the baby was born, work with her father's tech investments, maybe start a foundation to help other women entrepreneurs who had been exploited by male business partners. The future suddenly looked bright again. On Monday morning, Patricia called with devastating news. Sarah, I'm afraid we have a problem. A big one. What happened? Jake's legal team filed a preemptive strike. They're claiming you signed over your intellectual property rights 2 years ago as part of a corporate restructuring agreement. Sarah's blood ran cold. That's impossible. I never signed anything like that. They have documents, your signature, witnesses. It's all properly notarized and filed with the state. Frank took the phone from Sarah's trembling hands. Patricia, what exactly are we looking at? Insurance paperwork, Frank, brilliantly disguised. Jake's lawyers embedded the IP transfer language in what appeared to be routine business insurance forms. Sarah signed them thinking she was just updating company policies. Sarah remembered the stack of boring paperwork Jake had asked her to sign 2 years ago. Insurance stuff, he had said, just keeping everything current for the business. She had trusted him completely, signing without reading the fine print. Can we challenge it? Frank asked. We can try, but the documentation is solid. Jake's been planning this divorce for at least 2 years. Sarah sat down heavily, her hands automatically going to her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. There's more, Patricia continued reluctantly. They're also filing a restraining order claiming you've been harassing Jake and Madison through social media and third parties. I haven't contacted them at all, Sarah protested. Someone has been leaving negative reviews on Madison's social media accounts and calling Jake's business partners. They have screenshots and phone records. Sarah looked at Maya, who had gone pale. Maya, tell me you didn't... I was trying to help, Maya said defensively. I thought if people knew the truth about what Jake was doing... You gave them ammunition, Frank said grimly. They're going to paint Sarah as an unstable, vengeful ex-wife who can't be trusted. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. By evening, Sarah was legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Jake or Madison, from contacting any of Jake's business associates, and from posting anything about either of them on social media. Worse, the judge had been clearly influenced by Jake's portrayal of Sarah as emotionally unstable due to pregnancy hormones and the stress of the divorce. The prenup appears to be ironclad, Patricia reported after reviewing all the evidence. And with the harassment allegations, any jury is going to see Sarah as the bitter ex-wife trying to destroy her successful husband's career. Frank Reynolds, who had built his fortune on never accepting defeat, looked older than Sarah had ever seen him. Dad, Sarah asked quietly. We'll keep fighting, he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. There has to be something we're missing. But Sarah could see the truth in her father's eyes. Jake had outmaneuvered them completely. Every move Frank made, Jake had anticipated and countered. The boy from San Francisco had beaten the master of Boston financial warfare. That night, Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling her daughter move restlessly inside her. She had gone from crushing despair to soaring hope, and back to despair in less than 2 weeks. Jake Morrison hadn't just stolen her business and destroyed her marriage. He had played her family like amateurs. Universal dilemma. We've all trusted someone completely, only to discover they had been betraying us all along. That moment when you realize your own love and trust were used as weapons against you, it's a violation that cuts deeper than any other betrayal. Sarah's story reminds us that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the most calculating cruelty. Sarah was folding tiny baby clothes when the notification chimed on her phone. A Google alert for her name had triggered, which was unusual since she had always maintained a deliberately low online profile. The link led to a TechCrunch article titled "The Dark Side of Silicon Valley When Startup Founders Turn Stalker." Sarah's heart stopped as she began reading. The article featured a large photo of Jake looking professional and concerned, alongside a smaller, unflattering photo of Sarah from her social media, clearly chosen to make her look disheveled and unstable. Jake Morrison, CEO of the rapidly growing analytics platform Morrison Holdings, has been forced to take legal action against his estranged wife, Sarah Mason, who has allegedly been conducting a harassment campaign designed to damage his company and his relationship with social media influencer Madison Wells. The article began. Sarah read in horror as the reporter painted her as a vengeful ex-wife who couldn't accept that her marriage was over. The article claimed she had been flooding social media with false accusations, harassing business partners with unsubstantiated claims about stolen intellectual property, and using her pregnancy to manipulate public sympathy. Maya's well-intentioned attempts to defend Sarah had been twisted into evidence of a coordinated attack campaign. This case highlights the darker side of startup culture, where personal relationships and business partnerships often become dangerously intertwined. The article concluded. While divorce is never easy, Mr. Morrison's situation demonstrates what can happen when professional and personal boundaries are not properly maintained. The article had been shared 8,000 times in 2 hours. Sarah's phone started ringing immediately. Other tech bloggers wanted interviews. Her former colleagues were texting, asking if the article was true. Even her landlord called, expressing concern about drama affecting the building. But the worst part was the comments section, where hundreds of strangers dissected her life with vicious enthusiasm. Gold Digger couldn't handle losing the gravy train. Typical bitter baby mama trying to destroy a successful man. She looks crazy in that photo. Jake dodged a bullet. Why do women always use pregnancy as a weapon? Sarah found herself Googling her own name obsessively, watching as the story spread across tech blogs, social media platforms, and even mainstream news outlets. Each retelling added new details that painted her in worse light. One article claimed she had never contributed meaningfully to the technical development of their app. Another suggested she had married Morrison specifically to gain access to his business connections and steal his ideas. By the end of the week, Sarah Mason's startup harassment was auto-completing in search engines. Her digital reputation was permanently destroyed. Maya found Sarah curled up on her couch, laptop open to the latest article about the Morrison Holdings stalker situation. "You need to stop reading this stuff," Maya said gently, closing the laptop. "How can I stop? This is going to follow me forever." Sarah's voice was hollow. "No one will ever hire me now. Everyone believes I'm some kind of psychotic ex-wife. The people who matter know the truth. Do they?" Sarah gestured at her silent phone. "Half my professional contacts won't return my calls. 3 consulting clients have canceled contracts. My own uncle shared that TechCrunch article on LinkedIn with a comment about why startup partnerships with romantic partners never work." Sarah had underestimated how thoroughly Jake would destroy her reputation to protect his own. He hadn't just stolen her business, he had made her unemployable in the industry she had devoted her career to building. The psychological toll was devastating, as Sarah found herself second-guessing every memory of their relationship. Had she really contributed as much as she thought? Was Jake right that she had been holding him back? The constant media narrative that she was delusional and vindictive began to feel like truth. When she tried to defend herself online, her responses were screenshot and mocked as evidence of her instability. When she stayed silent, her silence was interpreted as admission of guilt. Jake had created a perfect trap. Anything Sarah did to fight back would be used as proof that she was exactly the kind of person he claimed she was. The worst moment came when Sarah received a call from Dr. Patricia Reeves. "Sarah, I need to discuss something sensitive with you. I've had several reporters calling the hospital asking about your pregnancy and mental health status. They can't access my medical records," Sarah said, horrified. "No, but they're fishing for information. And I have to ask, have you been under unusual stress lately? Your blood pressure has been elevated during your recent visits." Sarah realized that even her pregnancy was being weaponized against her. Any health issues caused by the stress of Jake's attacks would be presented as evidence that she was unstable and potentially dangerous. That night, Frank called from Boston with more bad news. "The story has reached the East Coast business press," he reported grimly. "Bloomberg ran a piece about startup relationship drama. Wall Street Journal mentioned it in their tech roundup. Dad, I can't take much more of this." "I know, sweetheart, but we can't give up. Sometimes the only way out is through what Jake has convinced the entire world that I'm crazy. Even if we prove he stole my work, everyone will just say I'm making it up." Frank was quiet for a long moment. "There might be another way, but you're not going to like it." "What do you mean?" "I've been doing some research on Madison Wells, the young woman Jake is engaged to. Her social media presence is very carefully managed, but there are some inconsistencies in her story that suggest she might not be as legitimate as she appears." Sarah felt a spark of interest for the first time in days. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Her modeling career, her business credentials, even her social media followers. A lot of it appears to be manufactured. If she's been helping Jake deceive investors about his company's public image, that could be securities fraud." "You want me to go after Madison?" "I want us to investigate whether Jake's new relationship is built on the same lies as his business practices. If Madison is part of a broader pattern of deception, it changes the entire narrative." Sarah hesitated. After weeks of being painted as a vindictive ex-wife, the last thing she wanted was to give Jake's supporters more ammunition. But then she thought about her daughter. Who would grow up in a world where her father was celebrated as a visionary entrepreneur while her mother was remembered as a footnote of female hysteria? "What do we need to do?" Sarah asked. "Leave that to me," Frank replied. "It's time to remind Mr. Morrison that he's not the only one who knows how to play hardball." Sarah was 35 weeks pregnant when Child Protective Services knocked on her door. "Ms. Mason, I'm Jennifer Carter with CPS. We've received a report of concern regarding your ability to provide a safe environment for your unborn child." Sarah's hands instinctively went to her belly. "I don't understand. What kind of report?" Jennifer Carter consulted her tablet. "The report alleges substance abuse, erratic behavior, and inability to maintain stable housing or employment. We're required to investigate all reports involving unborn children." "This is insane," Sarah said, stepping back from the door. "I don't use drugs. I don't drink. I've been on bed rest following doctor's orders." "May I come in? I need to document the living conditions and ask you some questions." Sarah's apartment, which had always been modest but clean, suddenly felt inadequate under the social worker's scrutiny. Jennifer Carter photographed everything: the stack of unpaid bills on the coffee table, the sparse refrigerator, the single bedroom that would soon need to accommodate a newborn. Miss Mason, I need to ask about your mental health status. Have you been treated for depression, anxiety, or any other psychological conditions? No. I mean, I've been stressed because of my divorce, but that's normal, right? Have you made any threats against your ex-husband or his fiancé? Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. Someone filed a false report to get CPS involved. I can't discuss the source of reports, Jennifer replied carefully. But I do need to address some concerning documentation that's been provided to our office. She showed Sarah printouts of social media posts that appeared to come from Sarah's accounts, angry rants about Jake, threats to make him pay, references to feeling desperate enough to do anything. I didn't write these, Sarah said, her voice rising. These aren't my words. The posts were made from accounts linked to your name and photo. Then someone created fake accounts. This is harassment. Jennifer made notes on her tablet. Ms. Mason, I also need to ask about your financial situation. Can you afford to provide for a child? Do you have stable housing? Health insurance? Every question revealed another way Jake had systematically undermined her ability to be seen as a fit mother. No job, no insurance, mounting debt, and now a CPS investigation based on fabricated evidence. I'm going to recommend that the hospital notify our office when you go into labor, Jennifer said as she prepared to leave. We may need to assess the situation at that time. The implication was clear. They were considering taking her baby. Sarah called Frank in panic, barely able to speak through her tears. They want to take my daughter, Dad. Jake somehow convinced CPS that I'm an unfit mother. Calm down, Sarah. We'll handle this. But even Frank's voice carried a note of concern. I'm calling Patricia and our investigator right now. The investigation revealed the scope of Jake's manipulation. Someone had indeed created fake social media accounts in Sarah's name, complete with stolen photos and carefully crafted posts designed to make her appear unstable and vengeful. The accounts had been active for weeks, building a digital paper trail of increasingly erratic behavior. It's sophisticated psychological warfare, Frank's investigator reported. Someone with resources and technical knowledge created an entire false persona to discredit Ms. Reynolds. But proving the accounts were fake would take weeks, and CPS was moving quickly. Sarah's caseworker was recommending supervised visits only, pending a full psychological evaluation and home study that could take months to complete. 2 days later, Sarah went into labor at 36 weeks. Emma Grace Morrison. Jake had refused to let Sarah hyphenate the baby's name was born healthy but small, requiring several days in the NICU for monitoring. Sarah had never experienced love so fierce and protective as the moment she first held her daughter. Jennifer Carter arrived at the hospital 8 hours after Emma's birth. Ms. Mason, I need to discuss the custody arrangements while your daughter remains in the NICU. What custody arrangements? She's my baby. Given the ongoing investigation and concerns about your stability, the court has granted temporary custody to the father. Sarah's world collapsed. Jake gets custody. Mr. Morrison has demonstrated financial stability, secure housing, and no concerning behavioral patterns. The court feels this is in the child's best interests until the investigation is completed. Sarah looked through the NICU window at her daughter, connected to monitors and feeding tubes, utterly vulnerable and dependent. She had carried Emma for 8 months, had felt every kick and hiccup, had already planned out lullabies and bedtime stories. Jake arrived 2 hours later with Madison in tow, both dressed as if for a photo shoot. Madison carried a designer diaper bag and immediately started taking selfies with the adorable baby. Sarah, Jake said with false concern, I hope you understand this is what's best for Emma. She needs stability. I'm her mother, Sarah whispered. And I'm her father. The father with a secure income, health insurance, and a stable relationship. Jake's voice carried that familiar edge of satisfaction. You'll be allowed supervised visits once you've completed the court-mandated programs. Sarah watched Madison pose for photos with her newborn daughter, the woman who had helped destroy her marriage, now literally taking her place as Emma's caregiver. Programs, Sarah asked weakly. Parenting classes, psychological evaluation, substance abuse counseling, even though we both know you don't have a drug problem. The court wants to be thorough. Jake had orchestrated the perfect final blow. He hadn't just taken her business and destroyed her reputation, he had taken her child. As the nurse wheeled Emma away in Jake's arms, Sarah realized she had been completely outmaneuvered. Every move she had made, every attempt to fight back, had been anticipated and countered. Jake Morrison had won everything. That night, alone in her hospital room, Sarah stared at the empty bassinet that should have held her daughter. She had been reduced to supervised visits with her own child, branded as unstable and unfit, while Jake played happy family with his new girlfriend and the baby Sarah had carried and delivered. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah felt something besides despair. She felt rage, pure, crystalline, focused rage. Jake had made one critical error in his complete victory. He had given her nothing left to lose. Sarah sat in the sterile family court waiting room, watching Jake and Madison play with Emma in the supervised visitation area. Her daughter, now 3 weeks old, gurgled happily in Madison's arms while Jake took photos for what Sarah knew would become another social media post about their beautiful family. The psychologist had just delivered her evaluation. Sarah showed signs of adjustment disorder with depressed mood and difficulty accepting changed circumstances, but was not a danger to her child. Unfortunately, the report recommended continued supervised visits until Sarah could demonstrate emotional stability and financial independence. Catch-22. She couldn't get financial independence without her reputation, couldn't get her reputation back without fighting Jake, and couldn't fight Jake without appearing unstable. Maya found Sarah in the hospital cafeteria afterward, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The investigator your dad hired found something, Maya said, sliding a manila folder across the table. Inside were printouts of financial documents, social media analytics, and what appeared to be modeling contracts. Madison Wells doesn't exist, Maya continued. I mean, she exists, but her entire background is fabricated. The modeling contracts, the follower counts, even her college transcripts, it's all been manufactured. Sarah looked up for the first time in days. What do you mean, manufactured? Her social media followers are 90% bots. Her modeling career consists of 3 photo shoots that Jake's company paid for. She never attended USC like her biography claims. And get this, her real name is Michelle Watson, and she has a criminal record for identity fraud in Nevada. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Jake doesn't know, we don't think so. She's been running a long con, but she got sloppy when she started targeting someone with serious resources. Maya paused. Your dad wants to expose her, but there's something else he wants to discuss with you first. Frank arrived that evening with his usual entourage of lawyers and assistants, but his expression was more serious than Sarah had ever seen. Sarah, I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to say, and I need you to consider it seriously. Okay. Michelle Watson Madison Wells isn't just a con artist. She's part of a larger operation that targets successful men in tech. Our investigator found evidence that she's done this before, at least 3 times. She finds men going through relationship troubles, presents herself as the perfect upgrade, then systematically drains their assets. Sarah absorbed this information. So Jake is being conned too. Spectacularly. She's already moved $2 million from his accounts to offshore holdings. But here's the thing, she's gotten sloppy because she thought Jake was an easy mark with no real family connections to investigate her. Frank leaned forward. She has no idea who you really are. Sarah. She thinks she's stealing from some nobody startup founder with no resources to fight back. The conversation Sarah had been dreading for 6 years was finally here. Dad, I can't go back to being Sarah Reynolds. I built my own life. Your own life is gone, Frank interrupted, but not unkindly. Jake Morrison destroyed Sarah Mason's reputation and stole her work, but he has no idea that Sarah Mason is actually Sarah Reynolds, daughter of one of the most powerful financial families in America. Sarah looked out the window at San Francisco's skyline, the city where she had tried so hard to build an independent identity. If I reveal who I really am, it changes everything. The custody case, the media narrative, the business dispute, everything. Yes, it does, Frank agreed. Sarah Mason appears to be a powerless victim, but Sarah Reynolds has resources that Jake Morrison can't even imagine. It also makes me look like a fraud, Sarah said quietly. Like I was hiding my identity to manipulate people. Or, Maya interjected, it makes you look like a woman who was strong enough to walk away from privilege to build something on her own, only to have it stolen by someone who didn't deserve it. Sarah thought about Emma, about the supervised visits, about watching another woman raise her daughter while Jake celebrated his successful manipulation of the legal system. Shared experience. Most of us have felt trapped by circumstances beyond our control, forced to choose between our principles and our survival. Sarah's moment of decision whether to reveal her true identity and accept help or continue struggling alone reflects a choice many of us face. When do we set aside our pride to protect what truly matters? If I do this, Sarah said slowly, if I become Sarah Reynolds again, there's no going back. There's no going back anyway, Frank replied. The question is whether you want to keep fighting Jake Morrison's game with Sarah Mason's resources, or start playing your own game with your own advantages. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about the little girl who would grow up believing her mother was too unstable and poor to care for her, while her father was celebrated as a visionary entrepreneur. When she opened her eyes, her expression had hardened with resolve. Michelle Watson has no idea what she's gotten herself into, Sarah said, and neither does Jake Morrison. So it's time they met the real Sarah Reynolds. Frank smiled for the first time in weeks. There's my daughter. That night, Sarah sat down at her laptop and began typing an email to Patricia Hoffman, but this time she signed it with her real name, Sarah Elizabeth Reynolds. Subject line, Motion to Reopen Reynolds, v. Morrison New Evidence of Fraud. The war was about to begin in earnest. But first, they had to save Jake from his own stupidity long enough to destroy him properly. The Reynolds family law firm occupied 3 floors of a Boston skyscraper, with conference rooms that had witnessed the dismantling of corporate empires and the restructuring of generational wealth. Sarah hadn't set foot in the building since her dramatic departure 6 years ago, but walking through the marble lobby felt like putting on armor. Miss Reynolds, the receptionist said with genuine warmth, welcome home. The war room Patricia Hoffman had assembled was impressive even by Reynolds standards. Financial analysts, corporate investigators, securities lawyers, and forensic accountants filled a conference table that could seat 20. Multiple screens displayed Jake Morrison's financial networks, Madison Wells's fabricated history, and a timeline of every fraudulent transaction they had uncovered. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia announced as Sarah took her seat at the head of the table, Meet your actual client. Sarah Elizabeth Reynolds, sole heir to Reynolds Capital, daughter of Frank Reynolds, and rightful owner of the intellectual property that built Morrison Holdings. The transformation was remarkable. These weren't lawyers taking on a charity case for an abused ex-wife. These were elite attorneys working for one of Boston's most powerful families, and their energy was palpable. Phase 1 is already complete, reported Marcus Chen, the forensic accountant Frank had flown in from Hong Kong. Michelle Watson has systematically drained approximately $4.7 million from Jake Morrison's personal and business accounts over the past 6 months. Sarah studied the financial flowcharts on the wall. She's been planning this since before they got engaged. Longer than that. Our investigation suggests she targeted Jake specifically because his company was preparing to go public. She positioned herself to extract maximum value right before the IPO launch. Patricia pulled up social media analytics. Michelle's online presence was designed to appeal precisely to Jake's demographic and psychological profile. The photos, the interests, even her apparent education background, it was all crafted to make her irresistible to him specifically. She's a professional, Sarah realized. This wasn't opportunistic. This was a targeted financial assassination. Exactly. And normally, it would work perfectly. But Michelle made one crucial error. Frank entered the conference room with a satisfied smile. She targeted a man whose ex-wife has the resources of the Reynolds family behind her. The plan Patricia outlined was both elegant and ruthless. Instead of simply exposing Michelle and Jake as victims of fraud, they would use the criminal conspiracy to reclaim everything Jake had stolen from Sarah, destroy his credibility as a business leader, and force him to confront the consequences of his own arrogance. Step 1, Patricia explained. We provide Jake with evidence of Michelle's fraud, but only enough to make him suspicious, not enough to protect himself. Why help him at all? Sarah asked. Because when Michelle realizes Jake is investigating her, she'll accelerate her extraction timeline. That's when she'll make mistakes we can document. Marcus pulled up bank records. She's already moved most of the liquid assets. But the business accounts and intellectual property transfers require Jake's personal authorization. If she panics, she might overplay her hand. Step 2, Patricia continued. While Jake and Michelle are destroying each other, we file our motion to reclaim Sarah's intellectual property. But this time, we're not filing as Sarah Mason, struggling ex-wife. We're filing as Sarah Reynolds, represented by the most expensive legal team in Boston. The psychological impact would be devastating. Jake's lawyers had been preparing to face a woman with no resources. Instead, they would be confronting an opponent with unlimited financial backing and a team of attorneys who specialized in corporate warfare. Step 3 is the beautiful part, Frank added. Once we've reclaimed the intellectual property and Jake's credibility is destroyed by the fraud scandal, Morrison Holdings becomes effectively worthless, at which point Reynolds Capital will make a generous offer to acquire the company's remaining assets. Sarah felt a dark satisfaction as she understood the complete strategy. You're going to force Jake to sell me my own company back. For pennies on the dollar, Patricia confirmed. And the acquisition will be structured to give you complete control over the technology platform you created. But the most satisfying element was the custody case. Once Sarah's true identity and financial resources were revealed, the narrative of the unstable ex-wife would collapse immediately. Courts tended to favor parents with greater resources, and the Reynolds family had more resources than Jake could ever imagine. How long before we execute? Sarah asked. We start tomorrow morning, Frank replied. Marcus has scheduled a meeting with Jake's CFO to present concerning irregularities in the company's financial statements. Nothing too specific, just enough to make them start asking questions. Sarah looked around the room at the assembled team of legal and financial professionals, all focused on destroying Jake Morrison methodically and completely. 6 months ago, she had been a trusting wife who signed documents without reading them. Now she was orchestrating the systematic dismantling of the man who had betrayed her. "There's one more thing," Patricia said, sliding a document across the table. "We need to discuss what happens to Emma during all of this." Sarah's expression hardened. "Emma comes home with me. That's non-negotiable." "Agreed. But we need to be strategic about the timing. If we move too fast on the custody case, Jake might realize what's happening and try to flee with her." "He wouldn't," Sarah began, then stopped. 6 months ago, she would have said Jake would never steal her intellectual property or manipulate CPS to take her baby. Now she knew he was capable of anything. "We wait until Michelle has destroyed his finances and his business credibility is ruined," Frank said. "Then we file for emergency custody based on his inability to provide a stable environment." Sarah nodded grimly. "By the time Jake Morrison realizes what's happening to him, it will be too late to stop it." Patricia smiled. "Welcome back to the family business, Sarah." For the first time since Jake had walked out of their apartment, Sarah felt like herself again. Not the diminished, desperate version of herself that Jake had created, but the confident, capable woman she had always been. Jake Morrison had made the mistake of believing his own narrative about powerless Sarah Mason. He was about to learn the difference between Sarah Mason and Sarah Reynolds. The text message arrived at Sarah's Boston hotel room at 6 a.m. "Emergency. Need to talk. Michelle stole everything. You were right about her. Please call me. Jake." Sarah showed the message to Maya, who was sharing her suite while they waited for Phase 2 to launch. "He sounds desperate," Maya observed. "Good," Sarah replied, setting the phone aside without responding. Frank knocked and entered, carrying the Wall Street Journal and wearing the expression of a man who had just watched his favorite sports team win the championship. "Front page, business section," he said, handing Sarah the newspaper. The headline read, "Tech CEO defrauded by fiancé in multi-million-dollar romance scam." Below it was a photo of Jake looking haggard outside the FBI field office in San Francisco. Sarah read the article with growing satisfaction. Michelle Watson had indeed panicked when Jake started asking questions about her background. Her response had been to accelerate her extraction plan, attempting to transfer the remaining business assets to accounts she controlled. Unfortunately for her, Reynolds Capital's financial monitoring had documented every transaction. The FBI had arrested Michelle at SFO while attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with 2 suitcases of cash and bearer bonds. "How much did she steal?" Sarah asked. $8.4 million from personal accounts, plus another $3 million in business assets, Frank reported. "Jake Morrison is essentially bankrupt," Patricia called from Boston with an update on the legal proceedings. The intellectual property motion was filed this morning. Jake's lawyers tried to claim they needed time to respond, but Judge Martinez reviewed the evidence and issued a preliminary ruling. Sarah Reynolds is the rightful owner of the original app technology. What about Morrison Holdings? Without the core technology, the company is worthless. Their IPO has been suspended indefinitely. 3 major investors have pulled out. The board is calling for Jake's resignation. Sarah felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been pity. Jake had systematically destroyed her life, but watching his own destruction was less gratifying than she had expected. Maya interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah, you need to see this." She was holding up her phone, showing a live stream from what appeared to be Jake's apartment. He was giving an impromptu press conference, looking exhausted and desperate. "I want to make a statement about the recent events," Jake was saying. "First, I was completely deceived by Michelle Watson. who manipulated me and stole from my company. But more importantly, I need to address the terrible injustice I committed against my ex-wife, Sarah Mason. Sarah's attention sharpened. Sarah is not the person I portrayed her as during our divorce. She's brilliant, talented, and the true creator of the technology that built my company. I let my own ego and ambition blind me to her worth. And I used the legal system to steal what rightfully belonged to her. Maya paused the stream. Is he actually taking responsibility? He's trying to save himself, Frank said grimly. His lawyers probably told him that complete honesty is his only chance of avoiding criminal charges for fraud and perjury. Sarah watched the rest of Jake's statement, in which he publicly acknowledged her contributions to their company, admitted to manipulating the custody proceedings, and begged for her forgiveness. It's too late, Sarah said quietly. 2 hours later, Patricia called with the final update. Judge Martinez has issued an emergency custody order. Emma is to be returned to Sarah immediately. Jake's lawyer didn't even try to fight it once they learned about Sarah's true identity and resources. Sarah felt her heart race. After 2 months of supervised visits, her daughter was coming home. Frank arranged for a private jet to San Francisco that afternoon. Sarah spent the flight reviewing the custody transition plan and trying to prepare herself for seeing Jake face-to-face for the first time since learning about his complete financial collapse. The meeting took place at the family court building, with social workers and attorneys present to ensure everything was handled properly. Jake arrived looking like he hadn't slept in days, carrying Emma's diaper bag and a box of her toys. When he handed Emma to Sarah, the baby girl looked around with bright, curious eyes, seemingly unaware that her entire world had just shifted. "Sarah," Jake said quietly, "I know this doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. For all of it." Sarah looked at the man who had once been her husband, her business partner, the father of her child. 6 months ago, he had been confident, successful, convinced of his own superiority. Now he was broken, bankrupt, facing potential criminal charges for his role in Michelle's fraud scheme. "I know you are," Sarah said, "but sorry doesn't return the months I lost with my daughter. It doesn't repair the reputation you destroyed or restore the trust you betrayed." Jake nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "What happens now?" "Now you face the consequences of your choices," Sarah replied. "Just like I had to face the consequences of trusting you." As Sarah walked out of the courthouse with Emma in her arms, Maya at her side, and Frank's security team ensuring their safe passage to the waiting car, she felt something she hadn't experienced in almost a year. Peace. The media was already spinning new stories about the Reynolds family heiress who had been secretly living as a struggling startup founder. Some outlets painted her as the victim who had finally gotten justice. Others questioned why she had hidden her identity in the first place. Sarah didn't care about the narratives anymore. She had her daughter, her company, and her future back. 6 months later. Sarah stood on the balcony of her new Boston penthouse, watching Emma play on a blanket in the morning sun. Reynolds Tech, the company she had built from the ashes of Morrison Holdings, had just been valued at $50 million. Jake Morrison had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for securities fraud. Michelle Watson received 5 years for her role in the romance scam operation. Maya joined Sarah on the balcony, coffee in hand. Any regrets about how it all went down? Sarah considered the question while Emma babbled happily at her toys. The woman who had married Jake Morrison 3 years ago would have found the complete destruction of his life excessive, even cruel. But that woman had believed that trust and good intentions were enough to protect the people she loved. She had learned, painfully, that sometimes the world required you to be harder than you wanted to be. "No regrets," Sarah said finally. Jake made his choices. He systematically destroyed my life to build his own success. When I had the power to respond, I chose to reclaim everything he had stolen. And now, Sarah smiled, watching her daughter reach for a butterfly that had landed on her blanket. Now Emma will grow up knowing that her mother is strong enough to protect her, smart enough to build her own empire, and powerful enough to ensure that no one will ever underestimate her again. The story had started with a pregnant woman being abandoned by her ambitious husband. It ended with that woman reclaiming not just her stolen work, but her true identity as someone who had never needed anyone else's approval to be extraordinary. Wisdom moment. Sometimes the greatest gift life can give you is the revelation of your own strength. Sarah's journey from victim to victor wasn't really about revenge, it was about remembering who she had always been beneath the roles others had assigned her. In the end, the most powerful transformation wasn't Jake's fall from grace, but Sarah's rise to claim the life that had always been rightfully hers. Sarah Reynolds had come home,